honestly, listener, I've not even seen the highlights. It's not important. I don't need to see the highlights. The talking point here is Southampton and the state of the Premier League and the Championship. Now, obviously, I know it was all tongue-in-cheek, but the video after the game of the Southampton fans singing Championship again, ole, ole, I know it's all like gallows humour and it's kind of, but I've seen it spoken about quite a lot from fans. And Andrea, I'm going to go to you of like, and I've talked to a mate who's a Sheffield United fan, and he's like, being in the Premier League is not fun. Being in the Championship is fun. Like, they don't want to get relegated, but you know that being in the Premier League is so unbearably fucking difficult. Like, do you think there's going to be a shift in fans' kind of attitudes towards the Premier League of like, actually, I'd rather just be in the Championship where we can pick up a couple of points? Because it's happening quite a lot now.
I think it just, as it's happened now 2 years in a row where the relegated sides have gone straight down again, I think it just gets that feel of like, okay, we'll just have that year, enjoy it, and then we'll be back in the Championship. I think it's quite sad that that's becoming the reality of like teams probably going to use that and just feel like, yeah, it's just going to be happening in that way. And I think it just shows again the financial difference between Premier League sides and those. Like even the teams that almost get relegated, they'll spend and improve vastly. So the difference is so massive. But I guess I feel like the main issue is that there isn't really ideas of how these teams can actually compete and try and challenge the teams above them in the Premier League. And I think that's the key issue, because at the end of the day, the Championship teams that come up, it's very rarely we see them have an almost 11 that could compete in the Premier League. They have to adapt. They have to kind of change their whole 11 near enough to kind of see if they can compete. And I think that's the issue. Obviously, the golfing class is just too high. So it does beg to differ that you do enjoy the Championship and the competitiveness every game. Every game's a tough game, but also a game you can win, but it's also entertaining. I think that's what makes it kind of upsetting for Southampton, because again, with Martin in charge at the start, they wanted to play the expansive football and they wanted to go for it, but they just don't have the quality, and then they lose out, and then they have to change their pragmatic style under Juric, and that doesn't really work either. So it's like, what else can they really do to compete? And then it just makes it kind of sad in a situation of like, do they have to just go to this negative football of trying to, like the old school back in the day, 4-4-2 or something? Just, I don't know what it is, but it just seems to be like there isn't, whatever they do, they're going to get undermined at some point, and I think it's just going to continue because the class in the teams is just getting bigger and bigger, as we're seeing right now. Like you mentioned in Fulham just now, competing for Europe. Like, when have we said that before? But again, that's the level we're seeing now. We're even seeing these teams starting to challenge for these European places, for example. So, yeah, it's the question is the players and the quality, but also stylistically, how do they approach it as well? Because you almost lose your identity, and I think that's what happened to Southampton. They were playing this great football, and then they go into the Premier League not working, and then they just revert to this even more horrible football, and then that's it. So it's I can understand their frustration and how perhaps the Championship is more appealing.
I think the coaching is an interesting point, because we saw it last year with like Burnley and company like going out on his shield with his style and stuff. And like, even if you look at the three managers that are looking like could come up in the Championship this year, you got Scott Barker, Chris Wilder and Daniel Farke, right? All managers that have struggled in the Premier League in the past, or if Daniel Farke holds on to his job, because Leeds are doing their best to get him sacked. But like, they're all managers that have come up to the Premier League in the past, not lasted a season, and then been replaced. And like Adam, I think Andre's hit on a good point. Like, no matter what football you play in the Championship, you're going to have a plan. You're going to have to be working on your Premier League plan already, because you're going to have to sacrifice those beliefs at some point, whether it's 2 games in, 10 games in, or 20 games in. Like, there's a coaching gap as well, right? Like, you're not able to really build a philosophy when you know that you're heading in with, even Wolves have got Mateus Cunha, if you know what I mean. Like, this is the quality of player that you're coming up against.
I think, that is a good point. Certainly, I was trying to look back at maybe the last time a club that went up and solidly built on being in the Premier League without kind of playing to the same philosophy as what
Fulham?
they did. And I was going to say Brentford under Thomas Franks.
Okay.
Because they played very fluid football in the Championship, but the moment they actually got promoted into the Premier League, they were grinding out results, and that's when they started to build on the consecutive seasons in terms of style and the types of players they brought in. What I find is quite fascinating, actually, is generally that the team that gets the team into Premier League, normally you'll see them being dismissed to the suspensions, demoted, or passed on. I think if you reflect on the sides that have come up, I think they've tried to give them a fair shot in the Premier League. But if we're talking just, looking at Southampton lens, at the beginning of the season, I could see they didn't have enough quality within that squad. So that was very evident from the start that they didn't have the players. You mix it in with an open style of philosophy with Russell Martin. Now, I appreciate that he got a lot of flack for the style of football, but if you compare it to what Ivan Juric has delivered, which was supposed to be rock and roll football, by the way,
it's been atrocious what he's done.
Exactly. It's been, we all called it out. It was such a weird appointment at the time anyway. But the fact was that if you're going into a season like this, you have to, from the start, have a belief or an idea of how you want to represent the club, and that's what you're going to stick to. I don't think they stuck with Russell Martin or gave him a fair shot of like trying to really repair the issue, because ultimately, had they been relegated with that style of football, they could have built on it. And I appreciate this is very similar to your Norwich situation, your Fulhams, where they kind of go back down, build themselves back up and go up into the Premier League. And then it's a gamble, isn't it? But there is a combination of factors here. I feel you have to have the right players. You have to spend money, but there is also that coaching element. You have to trust in a formula of a coach that knows how to bring out performances. I think prior to, say, obviously Thomas Franks, the only one that I think has been kind of successful was maybe Wolves with Nuno Espirito Santo. When he came up, he adapted really well and actually took the Premier League by storm. Yes, they had the funding already there. They had players that were far too good for the Championship. But I think that's the problem. Maybe that when we're looking at it holistically, when there's teams that have been coming from the Championship to the Premier League, there hasn't been necessarily one or two players that you kind of say they would fit in a Premier League side. I think we always say they could maybe mid-table-ish sides, but not for the higher echelons. And I think that's the difference here, is that actually, if you want to be a team that's pushing for promotion to the Premier League, you have to have a few established Premier League players to really help you go up and compete. I think that's the problem. But that gap, as we've all kind of alluded to, is getting wider and wider by the season, because there's no way that the Championship can compete with the same funds in terms of money being spent on players. And as it is, it's kind of a poison chalice to try and get yourself into the playoffs in itself, because you have to spend a minimum of 40 million on your wage structure. When you compare that to the Premier League, you're having to spend at least 200 million in terms of your wage structure thereafter. So we're talking about a Championship club having to entice a international player to play for your club to get yourselves into Premier League, which is just not sustainable. And I think that's the issue, is that the Premier League is not sustainable for the rest of the 72 that are in the wider league. So I think that's the wider issue. How can you overcome it? I suppose an element would be coaching, but you need all the ingredients, Rory. You need all the ingredients.
Yeah, I think obviously 2 seasons in a row now is like, it's the beginning of a trend, isn't it? I think obviously with the 3 teams that are expected to come up, and I know that Leeds fans will be saying stop saying it, but like Sheffield United, Leeds, and the other one's just completely disappeared. Who's the other one? Burnley, right? They've all been teams that have stuck around in the league for a while at times. Obviously Sheffield United have been up and down, up and down, up and down, but like, even when you look at Burnley, their defensive record has been incredible in the Championship this year. That's not going to happen in the Premier League. That's just not going to happen. No. And I think their top goal scorer is on like 10 goals, 11 goals. Like, even then, you're like, okay, well, they've been one of the best teams in that league, but you're coming into the Premier League, that's not going to be enough, boys. Like, Sheffield United are a little bit more pragmatic, maybe a little bit more Like they've got a bit more Premier League experience maybe in that side, even with players like Rob Holding and players that have played in the league. They've been around.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a bit more well equipped. Chris Wilder has taken the Premier League by storm once. Like, so maybe there's a bit more of a chance there. And then Leeds were established up until they like shot themselves in the foot for some reason. Like, so I think maybe one of them could stay up, but I'm kind of grasping for reasons that they could stay up. And these are three of the biggest teams in that league by some distance as well. Like, if you know what I mean, like in terms of their recent history in the Championship, they're by far three of the most successful teams. So you're like, okay, well, if they don't have a chance, then what chance have anybody else got? Like,
yeah.
So I think it's something needs fixing. I don't know whether it is the parachute payments that need looking at or funding into the Championship or whatever it is, but something that just kind of tries to level the playing field a little bit more, because if you have promotion and relegation in name only, people are going to lose interest pretty fucking quickly if there's zero kind of a danger, because Wolves have been so lucky this year. Like that, there's three there's three crap teams, because 5 years ago they go down. Like they've been really lucky that they've been bad when it's in this state of play, I suppose. Because even now tonight, Leicester lose 3-0. Is anyone surprised that Leicester have got battered again? Like, no. And the bigger concern as well, just quickly before we move on, I suppose, is for Ipswich, it's an exciting project. They got back-to-back promotions. It's still a club on the up, even though they're going down. Like, there still feels like a bit of optimism. There's a coach that might stay. It's not the end of the world for them. Whereas for Southampton and Leicester, it feels much more doomsday. Like, Andrea, it feels like Southampton could go down again, really. Like, we've seen Luton, they're looking like they're going to do a double relegation. Like, for clubs like Leicester and Southampton, this could have much more deeper impacts than it could for Ipswich, right?
Yeah, definitely financially. And again, they'll have to revert to kind of their youth academy to kind of like find gems and bring them through and kind of cut certain players. But what I find interesting as well is that when you look on the flip side, when you look at Southampton, the only player you could argue that's going to probably get a move to the Premier League is Diblin. And I think that just also says it all as well, is the fact that there is talent there. There is some talent there, not of course, but realistically, none of them are going to be Premier League players, or And again, that's where the difference in class is seen. But I think the only thing I'll say is that teams like Southampton and arguably Leicester, they seem to find the way of producing some real good players to bring into the team. I think Southampton have always been consistent at that, so I think for their sake they might be less at risk. But certainly, I think the financial implications could have a huge impact, because at the end of the day, there's huge kind of like contracts at that level, like huge wages, and then obviously like wages kind of stick to what they should be earning at Premier League. And even on the flip side, when they do get promoted, the amount of promotion wage rises that they must have as well, bonuses. So it's financially, it's just a big mess. But again, unless they stay in the league, it just goes backwards. And unfortunately, they don't have the sufficient to stay in. And then it just all goes to mess again, and they have to restart. And I think that's the issue. It's like a restart button every time you go down, and that's where you're thinking the parachute payments are meant to help, but it doesn't really help if everyone has to have a restart moment. It's like a reset button that every team gets when they get relegated, and that's kind of the worry for all these teams when they go down.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly, because none of the other teams in the Championship can keep up with a club that's just been given bloody 100 million or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it does just widen the gap. I think, yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this goes. I think Ipswich, I think they've got the biggest chance of being okay. I think a lot of their squad won't get picked off. I think obviously Liam Delap is probably going to get, I would imagine, going to get bought. But I think they can keep a lot of that squad together. And if they can keep McKenna, and I don't think he would necessarily be running out the door, honestly, I think there's a reason for them to still be like, okay, we've gone up, we've had a go, now let's build again and go. Whereas I feel like for Leicester and Southampton, it's much more bleak. But let's kind of leave that one there for now, I suppose. I don't think we really need to talk about the game, to be honest. I also feel quite bad for Aaron Ramsdale. Talk about a decline in a career.